Community is back, kind of. One of my favorite shows of all time. It just came on Netflix this year, like kind of right when the pandemic hit, which was a treat. I already do have the series, but it's very convenient for it to be on Netflix and all six seasons. I only really have the first three, which are kind of the only three that matter. But it was nice to be able to like look through the entire series and rewatch it again. That combined with Joe McHale and Ken Jeong started a podcast during the pandemic called The Darkest Timeline, very appropriately titled. And they've had like different guests from the show on their podcast as well. It's also pretty informative too. Ken Jeong is actually a doctor, so he like kind of knows what he's talking about in terms of pandemic stuff and numbers and things like that and what that means. And so I definitely recommend it for sure. And what was really fun about that is spinning off from that podcast, they managed to do a table read with the entire cast of Community, table reading one of the episodes. And like in big bold letters, they're like, the cast of Community, even Donald Glover, because obviously he's become a huge star since Community, and the fact that they were able to get him for this because which I'm sure is just because it's a pandemic and he wasn't able to do anything else, is awesome. And it was really cool to see them all together again. And they even did like a just like follow up where they just kind of hung out and talked, and that was really cool too. Yeah, but Community, it's kind of back, sort of. What a great fucking show. Yeah, one of my favorites of all time. Definitely worth rewatching every couple of years or so. I just really love it. It's very interesting to see how that show progressed and how it got canceled and then picked up again and canceled, and it had a very at some point they decided that they wanted to make 6 seasons in a movie. And they did eventually get their 6 seasons, even if it was like a slow death to get to that point. First 3 seasons are excellent. I would love to do a longer video at some point, like kind of breaking down, or a longer series of videos or something, breaking down each episode and all the like different elements that are introduced and like jokes that get set up and then like later on become ongoing things. The first season is like one of the strongest, although it's interesting because it feels very different than the other two. It's a much heavier focus on like them doing normal community college things with just like an element of over the topness. They have to hold like this like trial in the pool, in the local pool, instead of in an actual place that's real and stuff like that. You know, Jeff takes an accounting course or something that his teacher is kind of like a wacky guy who thinks that he's in the Dead Poet Society, and like it's very like grounded, over the top, until like we get to the paintball episode, and then it's like, oh, okay, now we see what this show can be, where they can kind of do whatever they want with it. And that's what makes the show so engaging and so versatile and so fun to watch. Is they can do anything with this series. They can hop genres. These characters are so diverse, and just you can put them in literally any situation and it could be entertaining. And you also, like, in the first season, you start to see a little bit of a shift in the characters, where like Troy, for example, was like this like dude bro jock kind of character at the start of the show, and then they realized like, oh, he has really good chemistry with Danny Pudi. Let's make him more of like a dumb nerd so that they can have more adventures together. Jillian Jacobs in the first season is like almost a different character. Her Britta, we start to see like a few moments later on in that season that are more like Jillian Jacobs, but she doesn't really like become true Britta until season 2, when they realize like, you're kind of awkward and bad at most things. Let's play that up. Which again, all of this like makes the show better overall. The season 2 opener is like one of the best episodes ever, where we get this great moment of, and so many great like meta things with the show, where I was hoping we could drop some of the more soap opera-y stuff of who likes who, which is mostly what the main like plot in season 1 is, and just focus on self-contained escapades, which is kind of what the show becomes, and it's all the better for it. Season 2 is great also because they kind of make Pierce the villain, which is the best use of Pierce, which in my opinion culminates in my favorite, and I would argue the best episode of Community, the Dungeons and Dragons episode. Because my two favorite things about the show are, one, just the excellent character interactions. Anytime it's just those 7 characters in the study room interacting, like, I could just watch that forever. And 2, the genre hopping nature of the show, where it can kind of become anything. Those are the 2 best things about the show, and we get the best of both of those elements in the Dungeons and Dragons episode. It's basically a bottle episode that just takes place in the study room, but we also get this like fantasy element of things because they're doing Dungeons and Dragons, and so they throw in all the different fantasy tropes with the Lord of the Rings narration and the music and the sound effects and all of that stuff. It makes it extremely entertaining to watch. Pierce is also like such a dick in that episode that it makes like defeating him the most like inevitable thing. Like, we have to stop him because he's being such a dick, and it's excellent. And it's also kind of like all character focused. It's all about Pierce not wanting to be excluded, and Jeff feeling bad about calling this kid fat earlier in the year. All that stuff is really, really great. Oh boy, I am losing my voice a little bit. Weirdly, they removed this episode from Netflix because of Black Lives Matter. And you might be going, what? Why? But if you remember the episode, there's a moment at the very start where Chang is in full, like, blackface, basically, because he's playing, like, a dark elf or whatever. And they kind of address it as like, is this a hate crime? What? But apparently, that's racist, and we can't have that on Netflix.
So while editing this part, I realized that I should probably redo it because I didn't really say what I was trying to get across very effectively. So let's try that again. Obviously, the Black Lives Matter movement is incredibly important, but I feel like there was a lot of big corporations that were like suddenly very eager to show how unracist they were when this movement really became a big thing this year. And it was like clearly this strategic move that companies were making to make sure that they didn't lose any money. It's like these companies wanted to like say that they weren't racist, but then also not really do anything to actually support the Black Lives Matter movement or help that cause in any real way. And I feel like removing that episode of Community from Netflix falls into that category of like, we want to say that we're not racist, but we also don't really want to do anything differently. Community talks about race in a lot of episodes. It's actually a big source of a lot of its comedy. Here's some clips that talk about race that are still available on Netflix.
Isn't Abed's dad a hardcore Muslim? They're not as understanding as Christians. You can get your head cut off with a salami sword.
Surely. That's the most racist thing I've ever heard.
Pierce will beat that in 1 minute. You're not my mother.
She's not?
29 seconds.
This is a chart of the features we're staying away from. Pan-Asian eye folds, Irish chins, women's breasts.
Is that seal?
Oh, that is our human color wheel. It goes from seal to seal's teeth.
What do you think?
I think not being racist is the new racism.
You know, National Geographic's got some tribal boob shots that are exquisite. There's something about a breast that's never been touched by white hands.
Does this one particular episode go too far with the blackface joke? Probably. But who does erasing it from Netflix actually benefit? How does removing certain episodes of shows from certain streaming services actually help reform the police or end systemic racism? And if the show goes too far, I think that's a fair excuse. Then remove the show. Take it off Netflix. Don't just file down the edges of certain episodes that were maybe a little offensive or a little too racy. It's like instead of admitting that they maybe went too far during this one episode, they're just pretending it didn't exist at all. You can still enjoy the rest of the show and have a good time, and don't worry, Netflix is one of the good guys. And it's like, okay, but who actually benefits from this decision? I don't know. All right, that's enough serious talk. Back to the video. Let's talk more about Community. Season 3 is interesting. It does kind of have a main arc to it, sort of. They play around with the concept of Abed a lot more this season, and we get some really cool episodes exploring just his subconscious and how he views the world and stuff. This season has the famous the dice timeline episode, whatever that one's called, where they roll the dice and it splits the timeline into 6 or 7 different parallel universes. We get to see the same kind of event play out, but differently depending on who's there and who's not. Really, really brilliant episode. It's really excellent how they like set things up. They set things up in one timeline, and then it pays off at another. Like, it's perfect, like Chekhov's gun, which also has one of my favorite lines ever. What does a pregnancy test look like? It's like looks like a thing with like a thing on the end of it. Okay, so this is definitely a gun. And like perfect Chekhov's gun. They set up the gun in that timeline, and then it pays off like a couple timelines later in the darkest timeline. And I forgot to hit record on the thing again. Fuck.
Ugh. This is why I shouldn't make videos, because I don't even know what the fuck I'm doing. Pierce kind of takes a back seat from being the villain this season, and Chang sort of fills that role in some really fun, overarching stuff with him being the security guard. We get that great episode where he's like a noir detective, but everything he says makes no sense at all. I feel like Pierce doesn't really get enough to do this season, because they realize they can't make him the straight out villain again. There's also this kind of weird beat at the end of season 2 where they kind of suggest that Chevy Chase was going to leave the show, but then I guess for whatever reason he decided to stay for another season. And so the way they write him is kind of weird, and I never feel like he really has enough to do that season. But the attention to detail in this show is excellent. They, those ongoing jokes, the thing where they say Beetlejuice 3 times throughout the course of the first 3 seasons, and then someone dressed as Beetlejuice walks through the background. Like, brilliant stuff like that. There's a political episode where everyone runs for, like, class president. Brilliant episode that's very, like, evident of today's politics. And it's like, wow. But there's this moment where they're like going through all the stats of the different candidates, and it's like this thing that's like designed by Troy and Abed. And the thing for Pierce, like it says age, I think his age is it's like 66 or 67 or something around that area, but it says 66, Dick, because 2 episodes ago in the Dungeons and Dragons episode, they have there's a moment where Pierce is like, put me in the game, and Abed's like, okay, well, you kind of need a character. He's like, no, whatever, just put me in the game. Pierce Hawthorne is who I am in the game. And he's like, okay, a naked 67-year-old man appears, and he's in the game now. And Pierce goes, 66, Dick. And so Abed interpreted that as his age and put that in the stats of him, of his like candidate thing in the political episode, like 2 episodes later. Fucking brilliant. Season 3 is also interesting because it's the first season to be the season that might be the last season, which sounds which just probably doesn't make any sense. But basically, the show was on the verge of being canceled almost its entirety. By the season 3, they thought they were ending, and I think that was when the first Save Greendale hashtag or Save Community or whatever it was showed up, and then they got renewed for a 4th season later on. And so the end of season 3 kind of attempts to wrap most things up, and it's interesting because then the show keeps going for 3 more seasons. Season 3, I think, is a bit of it's not my favorite of the seasons probably, but it does have, most of the episodes are excellent for sure. You got the pillow fight arc and like the whole weird arc with Troy as the air conditioning repair school tries to recruit him. You got jokes like, "You've heard of room temperature? This is the room." Stuff like that is incredible. But there's a few more episodes that are focused off campus, in a lot more focused on like Troy and Abed's apartment, things like that, which is fine. But I think you kind of miss a big element to this show, which is Greendale. Greendale is basically a character into itself, best personified by the Dean and Chang, two characters that the show also kind of needs to make the thing work as a whole. Chang is great because he's just kind of an insane person and just has like really weird, really fun storylines. And the Dean is great because he's so incompetent and insecure, and some amount of gay. It's a little unclear, but I think that actually works to the strength of the show, as it gets like gay representation without like needing to define exactly to what level it is. The Dean is like very fluid. We know that he's into Jeff. We know that he's kind of a furry, which again, like, just throwing that into the mainstream. Let's have a furry as a character. I think it works because he doesn't feel like a token gay character at all. He feels like his own unique person that has a bunch of weird quirks and a somewhat unclear and fluid sexuality, and I think that's part of what makes him fun. What else was I going to talk about? Oh yeah, like, okay, so back to season 3. Probably one of the less strong of the original trilogy of seasons. Like, for example, there's this one episode that is a good episode, and it's about Jeff and Shirley have the foosball episode where Jeff is trying to train under Shirley to learn how to be good at foosball so he can beat what's that guy, Kroll, at foosball and stuff. So like a whole thing. There's also a subplot with Abed as Batman, which is always fun. Annie accidentally destroyed a Dark Knight DVD. Abed dresses up as Batman to try to solve it. Like, I think this episode is good. It has some good jokes for sure. That bit with the soccer ball is incredible.
Were you guys walking around with a soccer ball just so you could do that? They left the ball and everything. I think they were literally walking around with it like a prop to use. It's like a $25 bit. It's not even that good.
And I really like the arc between Jeff and Shirley because they don't get a whole lot of stories together, but then when they do, you realize like they kind of actually have a lot in common. And that moment at the end is really cute. My problem with this episode is one, Britta and Pierce are like not in it. Like, they show up at the very beginning and the very end, and then the rest of the episode they're like gone. 2, the episode hardly takes place at Greendale. Dean and Chang are partly in the episode as well, or not at all. And most of the time is either spent focused on the foosball thing specifically, or at Troy and Abed's apartment. The other problem is like these two storylines aren't connected at all. They're just like two subplots basically that don't have anything to do with each other and don't converge in any way. There's other episodes of the show that like do have like very disconnected subplots, but like every now and then like part of it will connect, and that makes the thing like feel stronger as a whole. And also just the fact that the episode is missing like some of the characters and it's not really set at Greendale makes it feel like different than the rest of the show. So then we get into season 4, which is where things start to go downhill for the series, unfortunately. Season 4, Dan Harmon was kicked off the show basically just because Chevy Chase didn't get along with him. And he kind of didn't really get along with anyone on set, according to the rest of the cast. But the biggest issue seemed to be with Dan Harmon. Dan Harmon really kind of went after Pierce went after Chevy Chase, which has led to him getting kicked off. They brought in some other showrunners who hadn't really worked in comedy before, and it kind of shows. And you could tell that they didn't quite get what the show was. Again, I'd like to talk more about Community and really try to figure out what it is about season 4 specifically that isn't as good as the other seasons, and it's kind of hard to pinpoint, and which is why it's, most simply put, the Dan Harmon factor, you know. They kind of needed him to be a part of that show to make the characters and the world work as well as it did. I rewatched some of this season, but I couldn't really bring myself to rewatch all of it just because, like, there's nothing really about it that is very memorable or exciting about that season. There's a few good jokes every now and then. I think Pierce has some fun stuff to do this season. I think there's an episode where they try to recruit this, like, rich guy who's has no direction in life to become a student at the school so that he'll continually spend money at there, and I think that episode is pretty strong and feels like a solid community episode. They've focused just on stuff happening within the school. Troy and Shirley take this weird class where they learn how to be gym teachers, which is a fun arc that feels like it could fit somewhere in, like, the first season. And, like, Jeff and Pierce have this arc where they kind of connect in a way that they used to in the first season. Episodes like that are not bad overall. It's more episodes where you, like, see what they're going for, but they don't quite get it, are the ones that, like, frustrate me. And, like, I probably should have rewatched the episode with where they do, like, a Muppet thing, where they all have puppets and stuff, but I don't remember anything about it, and I think that says a lot about that episode. I think part of the issue with this season, and again, it's hard for me to kind of pinpoint exactly what it is its lack of understanding of the characters and of how the show is built around them. And although, yes, sometimes they do wacky, crazy stuff, but at the end of the day, all those wacky, crazy things are in service of characters, you know, characters going through things like people. Like, for example, they do, like, this secret origin episode where they, like, retcon that all the characters actually did end up meeting each other before the show started, which is, like, kind of dumb. It's a very, like, prequel, like, episode 1 thing, like, Anakin built C-3PO, it's connected, and it's like, okay, but why though? It's like, okay, sure, but, like, how does that actually inform the characters in this episode? And it kind of doesn't, really. It's just like, they met once before. Okay, so what? And it's weird because it's like, we already kind of knew that they were connected. Annie and Troy went to the same high school, and Shirley and Jeff met when they were kids, when they played foosball in that episode, in the foosball episode I talked about. That's already more connections than you possibly need. The season also, like, just kind of suffers from, like, certain fatigues of, like, I don't really care about that, like, ongoing story. Troy and Britta are, like, dating during this season, and it's just kind of boring. They had a little bit of a will they won't they, like, going on before, and they kind of set that relationship up at the end of season 3. So it's, like, not entirely Four's fault that they had to, like, do that. It's just, like, not really that interesting, unfortunately. It's sort of like the Jeff and Annie relationship. Do you really want to see that relationship, like, play out? Because I don't. I'd prefer it just to be a will they won't they, like, every now and then they have some kind of moment or glance at each other. It's just, like, more interesting to watch that than to just see them actually be together, because it's not really what the show's about. It's about their friendship. It's not really about who's going to get with who, and that's what they just realized at the start of season 2. I also realized I don't like seeing the community characters have sex, which, like, sounds weird because it's a sitcom, and, like, most sitcoms is all about that. Like, I'm fine with Jeff and Britta having sex and stuff like that. Like, that's well established in the show. But, like, what's kind of cool about the series is it's really not about that at all. It's like almost a kid's show in some ways. It's very wholesome. We do learn that, like, Annie isn't a virgin in an episode, but, like, it's a great episode and totally subverts the, like, most sitcom tropes.
I had relations with my high school boyfriend. We did it to Madonna's erotica on the floor of his walk-in closet, but he wouldn't let me look at it. He cried after and during. He's gay now. I think he was gay then.
Great moment. And then, like, she just remains a virgin as far as we know the rest of the show, which is fine. And that's like fine to have that as a character trait, and just like that's okay. And like that's the arc of that episode, is she's like, sex makes me a little bit uncomfortable, and I think that's okay. Can't people just be okay with that? And like, yeah, that should be what it is. And I don't like Troy having sex. I'm sorry. He's a little kid in my mind, and I don't like it. Where are we? Season 4? Yeah, season 4 also has like this arc about Chang, who has Changnesia, and like it looked like they were building up to some kind of thing with him working with City College and blah blah blah. But then it feels like the season got cut short, and they're like, okay, never mind. We have to just wrap up this something about the show, and it's a shorter season as well. So I think they like found out partway through that we gotta wrap it up. There's also some episodes that just don't have Pierce in them, and I think it was like Chevy Chase is just kind of like getting tired of the show. And there's some episodes that where like he's supposed to be in them, but they like cut around it, or they like make some like weird excuse of why he's not there, or they like have someone else like as a stand-in, but you only see him from behind. It's very weird. And so like, yeah, stuff like that is obviously not like their fault. Like the season looks like it got cut short, and so they kind of had to like quickly wrap it up. Jeff graduates and stuff like that. Yeah, also the finale seems like a good idea for an episode. They try to combine the paintball and the multiple timeline stuff, two of the best episodes of the show, which seems like a good idea on paper, but just like in the execution like is stupid and doesn't make any sense. So there's this whole like arc where the darkest timeline versions of themselves like find a way to get to the school, and there's this big paintball battle. They have these specialized paintball guns where they can warp you to the darkest, they can warp you to the other reality or whatever. And it's very sci-fi and weird and dumb. And then at the end it turns out that all of this was happening inside of Jeff's head, which is weird because the multiple timeline thing has been established as either it exists, but the main characters don't really know about it or believe in it, except for Abed, or B, it is entirely in Abed's head and there aren't any other timelines. Either way, Jeff shouldn't be aware of them in the detail that he is, according to this episode. Like, Pierce shows up, like a dark version of Pierce shows up, even though he died in the darkest timeline. And they're like, didn't you die? And he's like, I faked my death. And it's like, would Jeff remember those details if Abed like said them to him randomly at some point? I doubt it. They also like,
we finally figured out a way to make paintball cool again.
Did you, Abed? Did you? I'm sorry. It's just like, I should like this, you know? It's just like not quite there. And it's not quite as strong as it could be. It feels like the writers hadn't quite figured out why the show worked. And that's sort of season 4. So it's like almost there, but you kind of like missed the point of it. Like they'll do references to things by just kind of like saying the reference instead of doing it in a way that, you know, informs the characters in the story. Like there's one where they're trapped at Shirley's family's Thanksgiving dinner, and they're like, we got to do a prison break. And so they like, and Abed's like narrating, he's like, we have to narrate like Morgan Freeman did in that prison movie you've seen. And it's like, okay, but like, what about this is even remotely similar to that? What about a Shawshank Redemption reference informs the characters or the story in this episode? And they don't really. I don't know. It's weird. Season 4 is just not quite good. Season 5, Dan Harmon's back, but Chevy Chase is out. I think this season is actually really solid overall. It is kind of weird because obviously Pierce leaves, and then partway through the season Donald Glover leaves the show to become Childish Gambino. And so we start to see the characters leave the show, and then again in season 6 Shirley leaves, and it's just like one by one they all just fade away, and it kind of just becomes sad. But season 6 is pretty solid overall. Like, there's a lot of really, really fun episodes that do focus on the characters and the story. There's a whole Crazy The Floor is Lava episode that is obviously, like, very much like the Paintball or Pillow Fort episodes. Floor is Lava episode, it's good. It's a good episode. It's really fun and cool and creative. But also, like, it's about Abed not wanting to say goodbye to Troy. So it's still, like, very character focused too. Or that's kind of this season, is like really highly stylistic episodes, but there is like a core interesting character thing going on as well. The G.I. Jeff episode is great, for one, being like fully animated. Two, it's like it like actually is set in like G.I. Joe and not like a parody of G.I. Joe. It's like the show G.I. Joe, and it has like characters from that in it and stuff, and it's like, how'd they pull that off? It has like weird existential like toy commercials in it as well. But again, like it's a weird wacky episode, but it's also like about Jeff going through a midlife crisis, basically. Like it's still very character focused. One of my gripes with this season, other than that like Troy eventually leaves, is there's some like kind of cool character stuff like set up early on that doesn't really come to fruition in how you would expect. Like, Jeff becomes a teacher at Greendale, and there's kind of like 1 or 2 episodes about that, and then they kind of move on. They introduce Jonathan Banks as a character who's basically just his same character from Breaking Bad, but if he became a teacher. And he's really, really fun and cool. He has this episode with Abed where he's like, fuck you, Abed, you live in your magical world where you have no consequences. And it kind of like dresses him down and stuff, but then eventually they kind of come to a bit of an understanding of each other, and Abed's trying to write this cop script, and Jonathan Banks used to be a cop, so they agree that he'll help him make his characters more relatable and stuff like that. And it's like these characters that you wouldn't think would really understand each other coming to an understanding and working together. And it's like, I would like to see that arc like continue. I want to see if Abed's script turned out good or not, you know? Like things like that I wish they kind of fleshed out a little more. Season 6 is a bit of a mixed bag. This is when the show was like officially canceled, but then got picked up by Yahoo. Yeah, Yahoo had a streaming service. They had Community Season 6 and nothing else, and then it failed. Some say Community killed the Yahoo streaming service, but we all know that the Yahoo streaming service killed the Yahoo streaming service. Again, Shirley leaves, so this season also becomes like a little less recognizable as a show. They couldn't even get Jonathan Banks to stick around. Keith David is in this season, which is kind of fun. It's also interesting because he narrated the pillow fight episode, so like now he's back. It's just like a character is kind of interesting. But overall, because there's so few of the original cast, it sort of feels like a shell of its former self, which is too bad. Although the final episode of the series is, I think, really strong. They kind of pitch what season 7 might look like if they did another one. And most of these like what if pitches are all really, really fun, and we even see Shirley again. But yeah, Community is a great show that I recommend watching for anyone who hasn't seen it, even though I kind of talked about the whole thing already. I think that's all I wanted to say, although obviously I have lots that I would like to say on the topic and would love to do some kind of thing later on where I really like break down each episode individually, because I think that'd be really fun and cool. Anyways, let's move on to whatever the next topic is.
Wow, Fox has really streamlined the process.
Futurama is a show about an idiot, screw-up nobody from the 20th century who gets frozen and winds up in the year 3000, and because he's an idiot, screw-up nobody, he manages to save the world on multiple occasions. It's a really, really fun show, obviously created by the guy, Matt Groening, the guy who did The Simpsons. So it's really brilliant and satirical and has a lot of like elements that poke fun at modern society and how things might escalate in the future, that is like very believable in a lot of ways. This show also had like an interesting run where like the first few seasons are like 1999 to like the early 2000s, and then it got canceled and picked up again, and then canceled and like picked up by another network and stuff like that. So the show didn't end up wrapping up until recently. I still haven't actually seen the final season. I've been rewatching it. I just finished season 6, which is all the stuff that I had seen before as a kid, pretty much, apart from like maybe a couple episodes that I missed here and there. And then season 7 came out just a few years ago, and I don't think I've seen any of it, so I'm kind of excited for that. But yeah, really cool show. Part of its brilliance is you really kind of see where stuff like Rick and Morty gets its influence from, where like there's a lot of episodes that are obviously like just like kind of a wacky whatever situation the characters get into, but there's also a lot of episodes that are like hard sci-fi concepts but done in a humorous way, and also in a way that like where everything kind of gets reset by the end of the episode. And they also do a lot of like making fun of TV tropes and like fake commercials and fake shows within the show. Like they have the Scary Door, which is like a Twilight Zone parody. Things like that are like, oh, that's where Rick and Morty got that from. Their episode on global warming is brilliant. Again, like very stupid and silly, but it's also like, if they did drop a giant ice cube in the ocean every few years, that would be more than the government is currently doing about global warming. So you got us there. And like the way that they solve issues like that in the show, where they just push the earth got so hot that they just push it slightly farther away from the sun, which to restore its temperature. I love the show's like weird non-solutions to its problems like that are really, really funny and clever. The show actually does have like a really good sense of continuity as well, and they even set some stuff up really, really early on, and that doesn't come back till like seasons later. And there's some stuff that I noticed for the first time as I'm rewatching. So there's like one episode, there's a few episodes where Fry ends up going back to the time he left from and stuff like that. But there's one in particular where we find out that Nibbler, who is like the mascot like pet of the show, but actually but it turns out he's like sentient and like part of this race, that part of their deal is like trying to protect the universe from like annihilation and stuff like that. And because Fry's destiny ends up being to save the world, it turns out that Nibbler was actually there when Fry got frozen and sent to the future. And they set that up in the very first episode. When we first see Fry getting frozen, you can see Nibbler's shadow in the background. And it's like, wow, they thought about that far ahead. That's remarkable. There's also a couple other little things that get paid off later. In the first episode where they go down to the sewers and meet the mutants, there's like a wide shot where you see like all the mutants in the sewers, and like in the background you can see Leela's parents, who we like don't even meet until much later on in the show. Again, influencing Rick and Morty, the show also has like where most of the episodes are very comedic and wacky and don't really have a whole lot of like consequence, or like the characters don't really learn much, but every now and then there'll be like an episode that's like really, really wacky and funny for the most part, and then at the very end they'll play like some kind of emotional song, and give you this like emotional nice moment at the very end, and you're like, oh that was really nice. I liked that. I made me feel something inside. And it's like, oh, that's, again, Rick and Morty kind of does that as well, where most of the time it's a pretty wacky episode, but then every now and then they'll like hit you with an emotional gut punch while playing some kind of emotional pop song in the background. Yeah, but Futurama, great show. I don't really have much more to say about it, so let's move on.
Disco girl coming through, that girl is you.
Gravity Falls is another thing that I rewatched. Wow, what another great fucking show. Really, really great show. If you haven't seen it already, please check it out. It's right up there with Avatar, or I don't know, what's another good animated show? BoJack Horseman or something like that. It's excellent. Part of the reason the show is so good is because they had a whole story in mind, and they did 2 seasons, and then the show ended because that was all the seasons they planned. Like a huge theme of the show as well is that like nothing lasts forever. The summer ends. Eventually you have to grow up, and so the main kind of conflict of the show is sort of between Dipper and Mabel. Dipper, who really is excited about growing up and wants to be grown up and do grown up type things, and Mabel, who just wants to enjoy life and be a kid and have fun. And the show ends up kind of siding with Mabel for the most part. Yeah, you're not gonna be a kid forever, and so enjoy the time that you have. Enjoy your summer, enjoy now. And that's really cool. And yeah, again, another excellent show. They do a lot to set things up early on because they kind of had the whole thing planned out. So like there's mysteries and twists and turns along the way, but like they're all set up pretty much from the start. And so it's satisfying when it all comes together. There's some elements of the finale that I wish had a little more consequence to them. The big consequence to defeating Bill, the main bad guy, is that Stan has to give up his memory, and he's like, well, I never was using my brain for much anyway. So, and it's this kind of powerful, dramatic moment, and then he gets his memories back later on. It's like it would have been kind of cool if that was the price of saving the universe, that just Stan had lost his memory, and if he went, and if he finally went on the stand of war with his brother, but he didn't have any sense of who he was or what the significance of that was, but going on adventures with someone he cares about, he could at least understand that. That would be kind of cool and powerful. The show still ends really great, and it's still a good show overall, and yeah, I mean, it's great. If you haven't seen it, please check it out. Alright, the last thing I wanted to talk about today is that drive-ins are back, baby. I went to the drive-in 7 times this summer, which beat my record of, I think, maybe 2 in a year. So, drive-ins have always been fun, but obviously this year, regular theaters have mostly not been open, and some of them have opened recently, but I don't feel that it's safe at all to go. But if you have a drive-in near you, I definitely highly recommend going because it is a very good time, and you get to stay inside your car, and you don't have to go anywhere or talk or meet anyone. Unfortunately, of course, not very many new movies have come out this year, so most of the drive-ins have just been playing old movies. But sometimes that's actually better. So let's talk a little bit about some of the movies that I saw in the drive-in this year. So first off, we went to see Jurassic Park and Jaws back to back. What a great double feature. 2 excellent Spielberg movies. Just so classic. Jaws, what a great summer movie, and also strangely relevant because, the mayor in Jaws is keep the beaches open. It's fine. It's not dangerous at all. And as it turns out, every politician is the mayor from Jaws. So that's great. Yeah, Jurassic Park, what a fucking great movie. When the rain is hitting the cars and the T-Rex is there and you're in a car and you have the surround sound going. Oh, what a great experience. And they just don't really make movies like Jurassic Park and Jaws anymore. Or if they do, it's very rare. But damn, what a couple of great movies. And I don't know if this is in order, but next up we saw Batman and Bad Boys 3. Batman 89, I should say. Which is a really fun, solid Batman movie. Obviously, Batman kind of kills people, and the thing with the Joker being the one who killed his parents is an interesting idea, but it kind of, in some ways, doesn't make it so much that Batman is there to stop crime from happening. That's his true enemy. It makes it sort of the Joker is his true enemy, which makes it more of a revenge story than anything else. So it's an interesting idea that I don't think is fully thought out, but a cool movie nonetheless. Jack Nicholson as the Joker really kind of sells this movie, and I just love his performance. Everything about him is really fun and entertaining. And I think what I like most about it is how he really doesn't have a goal. He's just kind of out there to create chaos and fuck with people. One of his big schemes is to poison the makeup companies so that people can't use makeup anymore. And it's Oh no! It's just like a wacky scheme. It's not really like, I'm going to blow up a hospital or whatever. And there's something that's kind of really entertaining about him as a character. After that, we decided to watch the rest of the 90s Batman movies, I should say, which is an interesting experience. Batman Returns is fucking weird, and I kind of like it. It's very light on story and plot, but it's very high in like style and themes and ideas. It's kind of more of a Catwoman Penguin movie than it is a Batman movie. What they do with those characters is, I think, really, really interesting. They do this like weird Moses analogy with Penguin, and it's also like such a Tim Burton-y, like, oh, it's about these weird people who don't fit into society, and society throws them out, and like Penguin eats a cat when he's a baby, and like it's really weird, but I kind of dig it just from like the visuals. There's a bunch of penguins that have rockets strapped to them. I like the duality of Batman and Catwoman. There's this scene where they go to a masquerade party, but Bruce Wayne and Selena Kyle are the only ones that aren't wearing masks because their face is the real mask and the real face is the Batman mask. Oh! But it's just like themes and ideas like that. It's really creative and interesting, and I like it a lot, even though it's very, very light on like plot and like story. And I'm not even sure if it's a good like Batman movie, because Batman kind of just kills people willy-nilly in this one, but I still enjoy it, like from the themes and the ideas and the visuals. Batman Forever is not great. It's kind of bad, but at least it like has the elements of a real Batman story in it. They do try to explore his character a little bit, although I know there was a lot more that they cut out. Riddler and Two-Face are like extremely over-the-top goofy, but they can be entertaining from time to time. And the story with Robin is like kind of weird and cheesy, because I guess he's supposed to be a teenager, but Chris O'Donnell does not look like he's a teenager, so it's a little strange. But I think a lot of these movies that could come off like extremely cheesy are completely sold by Michael. Is it Michael Go's Alfred? Let me look that up, actually. Yeah, Michael Go. Yeah, I think it's Michael Go, but his portrayal of Alfred is so like genuine and sincere that it ends up like selling a lot of these like moments that are like that could come off like extremely cheesy.
Broken wings mend in time. One day Robin will fly again.
Batman and Robin is a bad movie. Hot take here. Yeah, when we rewatched this one again, like Forever I kind of enjoyed, because it's been a while since I've seen it, and although it's cheesy and kind of bad at parts, the parts where it's like feels like more of a real movie definitely helped sell it and make it a more entertaining experience overall. Where Batman and Robin is just kind of a bad toy commercial all the way through. The intro with Mr. Freeze is super fun in how dumb and campy it is. But then the movie like keeps going, and it was very kind of tiring to watch, which could partly be just because I've seen it a lot, way more times than it deserves. And it's one of those, like, I think it does like border on so bad it's good kind of territory, but it's also bad and not the most enjoyable to watch over time, especially like compared to the other Batman movies that are like real movies. It definitely suffers on review for sure, but it's a good drunk movie, I'll tell you that much. Oh yeah, and then Bad Boys 3, strangely enough, the best Bad Boys of the trilogy. It's called For Life, which means that if they do a fourth one, they've completely fucked up the naming structure, so good work, Bad Boys. Bad Boys 1 is like fine. It's like a pretty basic buddy cop movie with just like a little bit of a character arc where they sort of learn from each other a little bit. More Martin Lawrence learns, but that's more than nothing. The second one is fucking awful. One of the worst movies I've ever seen. I don't understand why some people like this one, because it is so long and so bad, and the characters are horrible people, and it's Like, I think it's mostly a comedy, but it's just not funny, which makes it, like, hard to get through. Like, the one moment I was really hoping would, like, pay off is the, like, shit just got real moment, which is, number one, done better in the first movie, and number two, happened so late that I was, like, entirely checked out by that point, so I did not care at all about what was happening with these irredeemable, terrible characters that don't grow or change at all. The third movie, one, wasn't directed by Michael Bay, although he has a weird cameo at one point. They tried to tell a story. I was, like, so surprised. They tell this, like, weird story about how Martin Lawrence is like, we're too old. We need to retire so that we don't get killed. Because Will Smith almost gets killed early on. And he's like, no, I gotta find the guy that almost killed me and get revenge and shit. And the other guy's like, no, dude, that's a terrible idea. We're gonna get killed. We're old. We need to stop. And then, spoilers for Bad Boys for Life, if you care, at the very, like, last half hour of the movie, there's this, like, weird twist where it turns out that the bad guy is Will Smith's son, and it just, like, becomes this, like, insane family drama where he tries to redeem his son, and he had this, like, this ex-lover who's the mother of his son is, like, crazy and maybe a witch or something. It's insane. And then there's this really awesome shot. There's, like, people above them and they're shooting, and then they point the gun up and the camera follows them, and it's, like, the coolest shot I've ever seen in my entire life. And it's in this, like, dumbass Bad Boys sequel that has, like, mostly pretty good action. Thank you, John Wick, for, like, making people step up their action in, like, every category. Still not the best movie ever, but somehow the best of the trilogy. Next up, at the drive-in, we're still talking about that. We saw Shrek and Fast and Furious, the first one. The best two movies of 2001. It was a good time. I sort of missed part of these movies because we were trying to help somebody jumpstart their car. I don't have too much else to say about that. Another one, they opened a drive-in recently nearby where I live, and they showed Breakfast Club and Fast Times at Richmond High. Breakfast Club, great movie. Although I do have two problems with it. One, they never eat breakfast. Why are they called the Breakfast Club? They don't eat breakfast the whole movie. They eat lunch. The Lunch Club would make more sense as a title. And number two, they do a trope that I really, really hate where there's, like, a weird girl and her thing is that she's weird. And then at the end, they give her a makeover and it's like, oh, no, she's pretty. And it's like, what was wrong with her before? She's, like, a perfectly good-looking person. But, oh, once she puts makeup on, now she's hot. And it's like, what? Why? Why is... Everything else about the movie is really great. And the character stuff is excellent. And I kind of get, I think, what they wanted to do with Homecoming, like, after rewatching Breakfast Club. Like, I think the weird girl in Breakfast Club is what they wanted to do with MJ, where she just sort of acts weird to be weird because what she really wants is attention. She feels like she doesn't really get attention at home, and so she acts out and is weird and goes to detention despite not being assigned it and things like that. And that's sort of what I think they were trying to do with MJ, because in the first Homecoming, she's just, like, kind of weird and will say weird shit, just like, and that's her character. She's the weird one. But they never really go far enough to, like, flesh her out as a person. And then by the second movie, she's just, like, a different character pretty much. So I don't think it really works, which is too bad because Breakfast Club is a great movie. It's great. Fast Times at Richmond High I'd never seen before, and I don't think it's very good. I get that there's, like, a lot of elements of it that are somewhat influential, like Sean Penn's surfer character dude, who's, like, probably one of the first of that archetype, so I get why, like, that kind of thing is influential. But it's just, like, a series of things happening. There isn't really a story. I wouldn't really mind too much if, like, the things happening were funny and entertaining. But they're not that funny. There's just, like, one of the characters is like, oh, he works different jobs, and doesn't it suck to work different jobs when you're a teenager? And it's like, and then at the end he like punches a guy, and that's his like arc or something. It's like, what? They like try to throw in a bit of a love triangle towards the end of the movie, but it's just like so late and so weird that it's like, I don't understand what this movie's trying to do. I don't know. It's just not very good. And maybe that's partly because it was next to The Breakfast Club, a much better teen movie. But I think even other teen movies, like American Pie, I think is a better teen movie. Because one, it's funnier, and two, there's more of a story. The characters have like a goal, and they achieve the goal by the end. Even something like American Graffiti, which came out before Fast Times, has a similar aimless quality to it. Still ends up being a better movie because it's more focused on just a few characters who all have distinct arcs and go through significant change by the end of the movie. Next up, SpongeBob. We saw the new SpongeBob movie.
Hello, I like money.
What inspired you to build a second
SpongeBob movie
right next door to the original?
Money.
Oh yeah, and that was next to Raiders. SpongeBob, not very good, unfortunately. Very similar story to the first movie, but bad. Luckily, Raiders of the Lost Ark completely redeemed that night. What a great movie. Just one great sequence after another. Beautiful. Then, finally, recently, they finally started to release new movies. And I got the chance to see Tenet, which was next to Austin Powers 2, The Spy Who Shagged Me, for reasons. The only reason we could think was that it is kind of a spy movie that also has time travel in it, and that's like the only connection we could find between it and Tenet, and maybe that was what they were going for, or maybe it was just, it's a movie that we happen to be able to get. But Tenet, really fucking cool movie. If you do get the chance, I recommend seeing it in like a drive-in or something like that. I've heard a variety of mixed criticism towards the movie. I think some of it is fair. It is difficult to follow. I'm definitely going to need another watch before I fully understand everything that happened in the movie. But at the same time, it's extremely cool and entertaining. And at the very least, it just goes to show you how great of a filmmaker Christopher Nolan is when he's like this late into his career in terms of like amount of movies made, and he's still like creating new inventive sequences that are things you've literally never seen before. It's fucking cool. This movie is very reminiscent of Inception, and I mean that in a very positive way, because when Inception came out, it had like obviously elements of stuff that we've seen before, but it was done in such a unique way and with such cool visuals and ideas that it completely became this like new, original, iconic thing. Look, breaking down Nolan as a filmmaker very briefly, I think The Prestige is probably my favorite Nolan movie, but Inception is, I would argue, is his magnum opus, meaning his like most important and influential work. Elements of it are still a meme nowadays, which is incredibly important in showing its cultural relevance. It does so many like really cool tricks in how they made it and how they told the story. The score is iconic. A lot of those tricks and tropes are still used today. The other thing about Inception that was really cool, and one of the main things that Tenet reminded me of it, of course, is how it like celebrates filmmaking as a medium, and how Nolan is one of the best filmmakers working today, creating elaborate sequences that you've never seen before, and stuff like with Inception, just like conceptually and visually and all the just whole vibe of it really like influenced me as a teenager, starting to get into making my own movies. Inspired me to make a couple of my own Nolan influenced short films that are borderline fan film, but sort of just me trying to figure out and capture the kind of filmmaking that Nolan is really good at. Both of these fan films are technically up on my YouTube channel. They're bad, don't watch them. But what's interesting about one of them is that it's actually very similar to some of the sequences in Tenet. So spoilers for Tenet, I guess. But Tenet, it has this element of inverting time. So like someone goes through a machine and then they can go through time backwards. So to them, everything is moving backwards, but they're moving forwards. And then for everyone else, that person looks like they're moving backwards while you're moving forwards. And I did basically that, where I did this thing with me and my brother where we had like coordinated this thing and then played it backwards so that it looked like I was moving backwards, but my brother Patrick was moving forwards. And the way we did that, which I think is similar to the way they did certain scenes in Tenet, is that we shot this whole thing where Patrick moved backwards and I moved forwards, and then played it in reverse to make it look like Patrick was moving forwards and I was moving backwards. And the me trying to be cool like Nolan, teenage high school filmmaker-y, like bad student filmness of myself, is I even went as far as using a track from The Prestige, another Nolan movie, in that short. And I think I might have even played the score backwards at some point, which is another thing that Tenet does, where when there are scenes that are inverted or from the character's perspective, where they're going backwards through a scene, they play part of the score but in reverse. So anyways, the point of all that was that Tenet was creative and cool enough that it made me feel like as excited as I was to try to make my own movies as a teenager as I again now, and just like, wow, look at what you can do with this cool concept when you're as creative and brilliant as Nolan is as a filmmaker. Even some of the less confusing sequences, like where they hijack a plane and crash it into a building, are extremely impressive, because you know that Nolan as a filmmaker would be like, yeah, we're doing that for real. We're crashing a real plane into a building. And like, it might seem weird because it's like, what about that is impressive? In Captain America 2, we saw like 40 helicarriers explode. Yeah, but that's all built in a computer. This is like a real plane crash into a real building. It requires much more like forethought and effort than simply designing a sequence in a computer. Not to discredit like all the visual effects artists who work endless hours creating a sequence like that. My point is that it costs about the same to have a crazy elaborate sequence done all through CG, just based on the number of hours you need to create that, or to actually do it for real. But it takes a lot more planning to do it for real, and you have to be a lot more intentional about filming something like that, which makes it always more impressive to me when there's a practical element to special effects. Anyways, Tenet is fucking cool. Check it out in a drive-in if you get the chance. I can't recommend going to theaters. I don't think it's safe to do that. And that was really great and rewarding to just see like a new movie towards the end of the summer in a long period of me rewatching stuff I'd already seen before, but not just a new movie that's fucking cool and inventive and does stuff that I'd never seen before. And then Austin Powers 2 is fun. We watched the first Austin Powers right before so that we were like caught up or whatever. Watching them back to back goes to show you just how like much stronger the first one is. It's a classic case of like a sequel that kind of just does the same thing as the first one but less good. The first Austin Powers like works because obviously there's a bunch of funny jokes and blah blah blah, but it's also got a lot of like interesting satirical elements as well, talking about how different the 60s was to now and how much has changed since then, as well as Austin Powers as like a character goes through like an arc. He settles down. He's the biggest swinging guy, I'll have sex with anything that moves like stereotype, and he gets married at the end. It's like a character arc, and then they completely throw it out in the start of the second one, which I get. They're doing a goofy like, we gotta have a different Bond girl. It's really funny how they like completely disregard the ending of the first movie entirely, but at the end of the day, like, the movie's less fun overall because it doesn't feel like it has as much of a story. There's less reason that I should care about anything that's happening because it's just a lot of silly jokes without much more going on. Okay, and then lastly, as a drive-in, I saw Bill and Ted Face the Music and Nightmare on Elm Street. That was a time where the second feature was like that one with Russell Crowe in a car, and we were like, so we drove over to one of the other screens and watched the second feature there, Nightmare on Elm Street. Yeah, I mean, Bill and Ted 3 was a good time. It was very nice to just have a movie about a couple of guys saving the world through music and positivity. It's just like nice to have a movie like that. It's just fun and a good time. They kind of combine elements of the first two Bill and Ted's, which are great. Please check those out if you haven't before. I like the second one, I think, a little bit more than the first because they kind of go nuts with all the stuff that happens. They go to heaven, they go to hell, there's aliens and robots. It's bonkers, and I really enjoy that about it. The third one was kind of like a combination of all the elements of the first two movies, a celebration of the ideas of the franchise, and overall just a good time. That's really all I have to say about that. Nightmare on Elm Street, pretty fun movie. It's been a while since I've seen it, and the first one, and like it's solid. The ending feels a little bit like a cop-out and doesn't really feel like it concludes the story that they were trying to tell, which is too bad. But I really like all the concepts and the ideas. Because they're dealing with dreams and stuff like that, they can make all the like traditional slasher kills, but in like a really creative and interesting ways. Because things don't have to adhere to the laws of physics because they're dealing with dreams. It made me like curious to check out the rest of the franchise, so I'd probably definitely see a few more of those. I at least definitely want to see number 3 because it's called like Dream Warriors and it sounds awesome. And New Nightmare, I think, is that the one? Whichever the one is where like Freddy becomes real and starts like haunting the cast and crew, that's the one I want to see. And I'll probably check out Freddy vs. Jason at some point as well because that sounds fun as hell. But that's about it in terms of movies at the drive-in that I saw this summer. Yeah, I hope more movies come to the drive-in soon because that's been really fun. I think that's basically it. Hopefully this will get me back into the groove of editing stuff for YouTube. I have a few other videos planned, and so hopefully I'll get started on those. And that's probably what I'll be doing for the first little bit in the fall. It's been a long while of me starting projects and falling out of finishing them, as well as reliving some of my favorite franchises over the years, but getting the chance to see stuff like Tenet again and having it be such a like cool, creative new movie has been really exciting, and I'm looking forward to starting to check out stuff that I haven't seen before again, as well as creating new videos, trying some new stuff on my channel, and finishing some of the other projects that I had previously started and do really want to get back into. So that's about it. Thanks for watching. If you did end up watching any or all of this long ass video, and I hope to see you again in whatever next thing I do. Goodbye. Have a safe pandemic. Don't be safe. Don't go outside unless you're being safe. That's about it. Bye-bye.